Felix Konotey-Ahulu, the Kwegyir Aggrey Distinguished Professor of Human Genetics in the University of Cape Coast, Ghana, and recently consultant physician, genetic counselor in sickle cell and other haemoglobinopathies, 9 Harley Street, London. I am answering a number of questions on the sickle cell disease patient. I've had a number of questions. The first 3 I shall dictate to you. The first is, I quote, "I have tested positive, O positive, and my wife has also tested O positive. And my teacher tells me that if we have any children, they will have sickle cell anemia, full stop. Is that true? A question mark. My immediate answer is, it is false. It is not true at all. O positive is a blood group. Sickle cell anemia results from hemoglobin type. The two are entirely different. The second question is not from a layman, as the first one was. It's from a doctor. And his name is Dr. Tei Gaali, which looks like a Ghanaian name, Emmanuel Tei Gaali. And his question, again, I quote, is, what is the latest effective treatment for vaso-occlusive crisis in SCD patients, unquote. Now, if a question is unclear, if the meaning of a question is unclear, I shall clarify it and then answer it. So that is the second question. The third question, which I think we will have time for this evening, is from a nurse. And she was commenting on an article on Facebook which said that they had identified a 90-year-old lady with sickle cell disease. And her comment is this: wow, I was told we can't exceed 25 years, but by the grace of God, I'm alive and kicking with no crisis for the past 1 year. I'm now a nurse. So these are the questions, one from a layman, one from a doctor, and the other from a nurse. Now, to answer them satisfactorily, so that everybody understands what I say, I need really to go back to explain why I chose the title that I did. The title was The Sickle Cell Disease Patient. I chose it because there's a lot of confusion about the person with sickle cell disease. In fact, my sickle cell disease patient can be abbreviated to small letters SCDP, and the P at the end could stand for patient or person, the person with sickle cell disease. Why did I choose to speak on the person? I have 2 reasons. The first is this, that even experts confuse the terms. How often have you heard somebody say, I have sickle cell? And what they mean is known only to them. Another one says, I have sickle cell disease, and what they mean is also known to them alone. Another one says, I have sickle cell trait, and what they mean is also known to them. I'll give you an example of that. I referred a lady with sickle cell disease and gallstones, lots of stones in the gallbladder as a result of destruction of the red cells. I referred her for operation by a world-class surgeon, and I wrote very carefully the diagnosis on the lady. This lady had sickle cell disease, in quotes, SS, unquote. And I said, thank you very much for looking after her. Half an hour afterwards, I saw the surgeon in the hospital in London here, and he said to me, hey, Felix, thank you very much for sending me this patient with sickle cell trait. Now, I looked at him aghast, because what I put in the letter was not sickle cell trait at all, but sickle cell disease. This is a mistake which a lot of people make, especially in the United States of America. They think sickle cell trait is a disease, and all sorts of happenings occur after that. Now, the second reason I chose the title, the sickle cell disease patient or person, is that I am speaking about my own family. I was surrounded from childhood by sickle cell disease patients at home, in school, and outside. My immediate elder brother had sickle cell disease. My immediate younger brother had sickle cell disease. The fifth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth of the 11 children of my healthy father and mother had sickle cell disease. How did we know that? Because the tribe, the Krobo tribe, and the Ga tribe, and the West African tribes had a name for sickle cell disease before the Americans ever saw the sickled cells in the blood. In my tribe, it was called Haemoglobinopathies. And among the Gans, it's called Kwegyir. In Twi, it is called Ahontutuo. In Ebe, it's Nuidudui. In Fante, it's called Iwiwi. In Dagbani, it's called Dobakoteri. In Yoruba, Aromolegun or Lakurebe. So this was known in Africa before anybody saw anything in the blood in the United States of America. Now, my grandfather knew, as a few months after the birth of my siblings, knew that they were going to grow up to have sickle cell disease, known as Kwegyir or Aromolegun. How did he know this? Because the first sign of this disease in any child is called the hand-foot syndrome. As you can see, the hands and the feet swell up, and they are very painful. This was an article I wrote, way back in 1973. And it's in a book called Sickle Cell Disease, published in the United States of America. Now, so any illiterate in my tribe who saw a baby with hand-foot syndrome will immediately say that this child is going to have sickle cell disease. And I knew what happened to them before I went to medical school. I'll give you another example. Some ignorant teachers of science claim that sickle cell disease patients are protected against malaria. This is sheer ignorance. They don't know anything about the patient. They know a lot about the blood, but they don't know anything about the patient. Let me tell you, sickle cell disease children die more frequently from malaria than from anything else. Indeed, I had a sickle cell anemia patient in London here who was going to Ghana on holiday and went and saw her GP and told the GP, I'm going to Ghana and I have sickle cell disease. I want a prescription for anti-malaria tablets. And the doctor said, oh, no, you don't need them. You have sickle cell, you don't need them. The lady went to Ghana for a month, came back to London. Her eyes became yellow, had a sickle cell crisis, and died. At post-mortem, they found a lot of malaria parasites in the brain. So anybody listening to me now, do not believe anybody, whether it's a professor or not, who tells you that sickle cell disease patients are protected against malaria. So I chose the title really carefully because even the sickle cell trait has been maligned. And my parents, who were my own mother, who died at the age of 89, died from something else, high blood pressure, was a sickle cell trait. I know a Ghanaian today who is 97 years of age who has a sickle cell trait. But more importantly, tomorrow is the start of the Olympics in Brazil. There was an African American who ran in the Olympic Games at Mexico City some years ago and got a gold medal in the sprint. He beat the whole world. As you know, Mexico City is about 7,000 feet high, where the oxygen is thin, and those with sickle cell anemia, sickle cell disease, suffer aches and pains because of the reduction in the oxygen level. But sickle cell trait is not affected by altitude, even though articles that appeared in the medical press, especially one article by Dr. Jones, who said that sickle cell traits had died climbing a hill, a mountain of 4,000 feet. That was flawed scientific evidence. Anyway, the Olympics are starting tomorrow, and 1 in 5 of West African Olympic athletes are just like my mother or my father. They carry the sickle cell trait. They don't have aches and pains at all. And this Olympic gold medalist came down from Mexico City to New York and went to an insurance company to take an insurance to buy a house. They asked him to do investigations, and he went and did investigations. They found that he had sickle cell positive, sickle cell trait. And the insurance company charged him 150% for insurance for having a sickle cell trait. Now, this I published in the British Medical Journal, and I mentioned that when I was invited to give a lecture at the Dr. Martin Luther King, the Junior Foundation Award Ceremony in Philadelphia, and the organizers learned that I was going to give a lecture on the difference between sickle cell trait and sickle cell disease. They looked at the lecture and they took out the names of the insurance companies that I named in New York, charging 150% for sickle cell trait. And even though they took out the names, for all the time I was in Philadelphia, 4 days, I was given 4 bodyguards. You can Google the story in the British Medical Journal. 4 bodyguards. Go Google it and read the article. And interestingly, they agreed to enclose my last sentence in that article, which was this: St. Paul said in his epistle to Timothy that the love of money is the root of all evil. They knew that sickle cell traits can be world beaters, and yet they deliberately charge 150% for that. I mention all this so that when people are writing articles about sickle cell, they just say, I have sickle cell. Another one will say, I have sickle cell trait. Another one will say, I have sickle cell disease. And even in the UK at the moment, the expert committee on abnormal hemoglobins have called sickle cell trait the Olympic world medalists. They've called the state of sickle cell trait. They had the audacity to call it sickle cell disorder. Can you imagine anybody with a disorder in the blood running at 8,000 feet, 7,000 feet and beating the whole world? Now, this is the kind of confusion that exists. Now, it isn't that the original experts have not defined these terms. They had carefully defined them. Professor Herman Lehmann, the doyen of abnormal hemoglobins in the University of Cambridge, and Professor Alan Woodruff, the professor of tropical medicine in the School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in London, chaired a committee at the World Health Organization spelling out what sickle cell trait was and what sickle cell disease was, carefully. And yet, modern hematologists confuse the meaning of sickle cell trait and sickle cell disease. In fact, Herman Lehmann was so incensed at what happened to the African American who was charged 150% for insurance. He wrote a letter to the Times, the London Times, and criticized the scientific editor about an article in which he said sickle cell traits ought not be allowed as air crew. Now, Herman Lehmann, the world authority, but these things happen. So check. How do you check whether a person has sickle cell trait or sickle cell disease? Mr. Ashon, who wrote SCD, he was assuming, of course, that I would understand that SCD in capitals meant sickle cell disease. Now, I don't use capitals for sickle cell disease. I use small letters. Why? Because capital letters describing the phenotype, hemoglobin phenotype, are used for variations of the adult hemoglobin. Now, all mankind, all humankind is divided into three as far as hemoglobin. The red protein in the cell is called hemoglobin, which I spelled out for you, haemoglobinopathy. The red protein is inherited from father and mother. There is only one normal hemoglobin, and there are numerous abnormal hemoglobins. Now, for my father and my mother to have 3 children, to have 11 children, 3 of whom suffer from cold season hereditary rheumatism, they must be the couple that passed on the abnormal hemoglobin to them, because nobody aches with sickle cell disease with just one ache. To have a norm and an ache will enable you to win Olympic Games and beat everybody in the world. But to have 2 aches, one from father and one from mother, as 3 of my siblings did, will make you ache under certain circumstances. Now, how did I explain this to illiterates? Illiterates who knew about sickle cell disease before anybody knew about it in America. How did I do that? Well, I invented something which I call the canard, which you'll find at the top of my website. All mankind, all humankind is divided into 3. 1, those who have inherited a normal hemoglobin from father and a normal hemoglobin from the mother. I call them norm. And I put norm on the cube. Norm. Those who have inherited ache hemoglobin from father and mother, I have another cube called ache. And those like my mother and father and the Olympic athlete and 1 in 5 of the West African athletes who have inherited a normal hemoglobin from a parent, an abnormal one from the other one, an ache one from the other one. I call them norm ache. So this is my father. This is my father and mother. Now, I've got 6 of these because there must be a pair. There must be a pair. You have the pair of all humanity here. It's not only black people who have ache genes. I'll tell you a true story. An Englishman lecturing in the University of Ghana married a Ghanaian lady, and they had 2 daughters. And suddenly they realized that the children at the age of 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years, had the hand-foot syndrome, which I just told you about. So they brought them to me at the Bu Teaching Hospital. The man was absolutely surprised because he thought sickle cell disease was a black disease. So I said, oh no, John, I've got to test your blood. So I tested his blood and he showed norm ache. He had a normal hemoglobin from the mother and an egg hemoglobin from the father. And that was not S hemoglobin as was with his wife, who was norm egg. The egg was S, but his was D. So the children were SD disease, S sickle cell disease, egg. So what I would call them would be egg in brackets SD sickle cell disease, with the same symptoms as sickle cell anemia, SS, or the same symptoms as sickle cell hemoglobin C, SC, or the same as sickle cell hemoglobin O. There are a lot of other egg hemoglobins which one should test for. Now, I have said all this because that will help in answering some of the questions afterwards. So we must be careful. Remember that there is such a thing as sickle cell trait, which is norm egg, and sickle cell disease, which is egg. Yes, but if an illiterate asks you, how come that your father and mother did not egg, and yet were able to give the egg to the children, how would you answer it? The way I answered was that by an extraordinary phenomenon of nature, the sperm of my father, the millions of sperm of my father that carried the codes of my father, the millions of sperm, do not carry norm egg of my father. They carry just one of the two, norm or egg. And the egg of my mother every month at ovulation will carry just half of her phenotype, either norm or egg. So depending on which sperm of my father met which egg of my mother, the children who were born were egg, like the three I mentioned who egged, norm egg, like 4 of us, or norm. A norm sperm meeting a norm egg will give norm. And so in my right hand, I have the 3 different phenotypes, and my left, the 3 different phenotypes. Now, this is not only for black people, but in Greece, the white people in Greece, there was an area in Greece, a lake called Kopais, where there were more norm egg people, white people in Greece with sickle cell trait than in the whole of Kenya. The Kikuyus have only a few norm egg people. Yet, West Africa, plenty of us have norm egg, as I've just told you about my father and mother. Right, so before I go on further, be careful how you use terms. I do not use terms like I have sickle cell anemia disease. No, I say I have sickle cell anemia. I would tell a patient to say I have sickle cell anemia, to spell out the egg. The egg has been investigated and found to be S. If the person had S from father and S from the mother, then the person is egg, in brackets SS. Now, the feature of the SS phenotype is that the red cells kink more quickly than some of the other phenotypes, except the SD. And because of this, the kinked cells are removed from the blood by the spleen, and so hemoglobin level goes down and anemia is the main feature of the SS phenotype. So the SS disease has been called sickle cell anemia. So I don't use the term somebody has sickle cell anemia disease. You either have sickle cell disease or you don't have sickle cell disease. Now, the reason why this is important, that you shouldn't say somebody has sickle cell anemia disease, is that in the same way as anybody in England or Germany or any woman can have severe anemia from heavy periods, somebody with norm ache can also have heavy periods. And if they become anemic and they go to hospital and they check the blood, they find that they have low hemoglobin, and they also find that they have sickle cell, then they jump immediately to conclusion and say, you have sickle cell anemia. But no, the term sickle cell anemia, Professor Woodruff and Professor Lehman and the WHO group have reserved for the SS phenotype, for the sickle cell disease SS phenotype. So somebody with sickle cell trait who has anemia from heavy periods should not be called sickle cell anemia, should be called sickle cell trait or norm ache with anemia from heavy periods. I hope this is clear. Now, to go on a little further, I have already talked about the misinformation about malaria and the sickle cell disease patient. I will say things which are contrary to what is published in the textbooks. You do not have to say that the textbooks are right and I am wrong. You just have to say that Konotey-Ahulu was born into a sickle cell disease home, and he is not ashamed of saying that 3 of his siblings had sickle cell disease, and that is the fact. But there is another fact which I want to underline here. My siblings that had sickle cell disease, ache, inherited other genes from Papa and Mama, which made them exceptional. My elder brother, Victor Agbetey Konotey-Ahulu, was said in the tribe to be the most beautiful baby born. He was smashing. My immediate younger brother, Tei Jerry Konotey-Ahulu, was brilliant at mathematics, and I myself was not dull at mathematics, but he was better than I was. So he had inherited other genes from my papa and mama that made him exceptional. Sussie, our sister who had sickle cell disease, ache, was also beautiful. Her skin was soft and lovely. Her voice was melodious, to the extent that in my book, I said that sickle cell anemia women, sickle cell disease women, can be the most beautiful African women I know. Now, so I kept following a number of my patients, and they have become achievers. Indeed, I was the only person to assemble sickle cell disease patients, ache patients, for international conferences in the UK and Ghana. We had our first international conference at the Royal Society of Medicine in London, where sickle cell disease patient achievers, as I call them, were flown from Ghana to London to come and educate us, educate the doctors and the nurses at the Royal Society of Medicine, to tell them how they have been able to live that long and become lawyers and businessmen and teachers. Indeed, patients I diagnosed when aged 7 or 8 have now grown up and done so well, and these are ache, not norm-ache, done so well that when I went to Ghana on assignments or on holiday, gave me their chauffeur-driven cars to take me around. They had become businessmen and businesswomen. Some of them I have invited to contribute to this exercise on Facebook, to tell us how they have been able to live and done well. One of them is a pharmacist who works in London and Ghana. He's in his 6th decade, and he was working in a teaching hospital in this country. And he complained to the consultant that in the pharmacy department where he worked, he saw prescription after prescription for morphine and diamorphine for sickle cell disease patients. He confronted the consultant. He said, "Why are you doing this?" And the consultant more or less said, "Shut up. What do you know about sickle cell disease?" So he said, "I am SS, ache. Check my blood." They checked his blood, and hemoglobin was hardly 8 grams. But he was doing well. And the consultant was surprised. He said, "What?" He said, "I was diagnosed at the age of 7 at the Bu Teaching Hospital by Konotey-Ahulu. And he told me that it's circumstances that caused sickle cell crisis. So I should keep a diary and make note of all the circumstances that would precipitate a sickle cell crisis." And I began doing that. And I realized, 1, malaria, so I protected myself. 2, sore throat, so I protected myself. 3, sweating too much in the hot weather, so I began to drink liters of water. So at the next achievement conference in Accra, International Sickle Cell Disease Achievers Conference, I called it, he stood up and told us that he had not had a crisis for 30 years because he drank 4 liters of water a day, and his hemoglobin had never been up to 9 grams. This is why I don't speak about sickle cell disease, but I speak about the patient circumstances. I'll tell you another important story. The Sickle Cell Society invited me to address their annual conference in London one day. He invited me and invited another specialist. The topic the specialist gave the lecture on at the conference was blood transfusion and how to canvass and give blood. The topic I gave was circumstances producing sickle cell crisis. And of the 200 who were there with their parents, I asked the question, hands up. This was in August, beautiful sunshine in London. Hands up, any of you who have come here with a raincoat or umbrella. Of the 200, only 1 did. Immediately after the conference, there was downpour, heavy rainfall. They were soaked. The organizer of the conference, an ache achiever, I would call it, was soaked to the skin because he thought in August he could go out, and he began having crisis after crisis after crisis. Another important history before I go on was a grandmother from Nigeria visited her grand twins in London, again in August. And on a Saturday, at about 4 o'clock, she announced in the sitting room, I want to go to Sainsbury's and do some shopping. Who will come with me? One of the twins said, I please. The other twin said, oh, no. There is a program on television which I love and I would like to stay. So he stayed. The other twin and the mother went out. The weather in London changed. They came home soaked. And he had a sickle cell crisis at 8 p.m. and at 1 a.m. Sunday morning, he had a stroke. The boy still had a stroke. And I wrote about it in the Lancet. Now, circumstances are very, very important. Another important story, why I'm talking about sickle cell disease patient and not sickle cell disease, was this: a diplomat, 63-year-old Ghanaian diplomat, who was ache, and who flew a lot. And when he came to me, as I always ask, I asked him, what things bring on your aches? And without hesitation, he said, 2 things. I said, what are they? So I put them down. 1, when I fly longer than 8 hours on the plane, I have a sickle cell crisis after landing. 2, when I eat oranges. Now, this is in my book, underlining the importance of talking to patients and asking them what brings on the pain. Because you can't assume that everybody, every sickle cell ache who eats oranges is going to have a crisis. No. Everyone has got something peculiar to them, and you've got to find out. You've got to find out. I think I have time for another important information about the patient. A brilliant Ghanaian lady who kept having sickle cell crisis end of term was admitted into my ward. So I asked her, look, what is the cause of this present crisis? And she said, as usual. So I said, what do you mean as usual? He said, I told you before that in our faculty of law, we have visiting professors occasionally. And when they come at the end of term to mark exams, we have a party and we have our drinks. When I drink beer, nothing happens. When I drink wine, nothing happens. But when I drink gin, as little as a teaspoon of gin at 6 o'clock, by 1 a.m., I will have sickle cell crisis. And a few years afterwards, she came in again with severe crisis. So I said, what happened this time? He said, I wanted to make sure that it was the gene. So I took a little gene and that had sickle cell crisis. So these are very, very important. Very, very important. Now, to go back to the question of Dr. Ashon, asking what is the treatment of vaso-occlusive crisis. What he means is this: when a person ends up in my bed with severe pains and so on, what is the latest teaching about the treatment? Now, as far as my achievers are concerned, they are less worried about the latest treatment of vaso-occlusive crisis than they are about the management of the patient that keeps them from sickle cell crisis, so that they don't have to end up in hospital and be given morphine and diamorphine. This is the latest in the BMJ, which I criticized. In America, I don't know what they do. They give, in America, they don't give diamorphine, but they give morphine. But surely morphine suppresses breathing. You need air. Sickle cell disease patients need air. And when you give them morphine, they don't breathe. And more of their cells sickle. And they die. The British government has found in the Incapod report that they die from morphine and diamorphine. Google Incapod, N-C-E-P-O-D, Incapod, and say Incapod, sickle crisis. And you find the British government has found this, that they die. They die. And yet, people are looking for the latest thing that is used for treatment. I have ceased talking about treatment of sickle cell disease, putting emphasis on the management of the sickle cell disease patient. Now, having said that, there are some of the doctors who entirely agree with me, and they listen to the patients and they help the patients. If you have a doctor who listens to you, that is fantastic. You have a doctor who listens to you, that is fantastic. There was a doctor who listened to the patients, and he once put on the notes in red ink, "Do not give this girl morphine." Unfortunately, at the weekend, this 16-year-old girl walked into hospital with pain in the arm. And the nurses looked on the directions that are given in this country, that when the patient comes, give them morphine or diamorphine quickly, without calling for the notes of the patient. And when they were going to give the injection, the 16-year-old said, "What are you going to give me?" He said, "Morphine." He said, the doctor said, "You must not give me morphine." They said, "No, but this is what the protocol, official protocol from the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, the UK, says we should do for sickle cell disease patients." The girl said, "Look, but my doctor said, don't do that." They gave her morphine and she died. The consultant, the Englishman, when he came on Monday, found that he was so annoyed. And they did a post-mortem. They used a professor in Oxford to do a post-mortem on this on this girl, and they found he had more than 20 times as much drug as she should have had. But make sure that you have a doctor who listens to you. So to Dr. Ashon, who is asking for the latest for vaso-occlusive, I would say it varies from country to country. But I, for one, would not advise using any of the latest, because they themselves have found that the patients have died using opiates. Now, there are others who swear with hydroxyurea. I do not have time to talk about that at the moment, but I've never prescribed hydroxyurea to anybody. Why? Because one of our achievers who attended the Achievers Conference went on the drug before, and she found that it was an anti-cancer drug, and so she doesn't take it. In fact, she has written a book. She's a nurse. She has written a book on cancer treatment and puts hydroxyurea in as one of the anti-cancer drugs. She doesn't take it. I do not know. I knew the year that hydroxyurea was put on the market, 1994. I knew the professor put it on the market. Now, I can truly say that I do not know anybody who has been on hydroxyurea for 20 years, taking 150 milligrams of hydroxyurea a day, who is still alive. And yet, because of the textbooks and the articles, they go on saying, if they are not doing well, give them hydroxyurea. If they are being admitted too often, give them hydroxyurea, without asking them to keep a diary to tell them what makes them go into sickle cell crisis. On my website, I have described people who go into crisis after squatting. There was a surveyor, brilliant man with ache, who used to come in crisis. So I asked him, look, what started your crisis? So he said, I'm just working hard. How were you working hard? What were you doing? I was doing my drawings. How were you doing your drawings? I was squatting on the carpet. How long were you squatting on the carpet? About 20 minutes. That's the answer. When an ache person bends the knees, squatting, drawing his diagrams, the cells, red cells, which are around, ache cells are around until something happens. They are deprived of oxygen because the legs are bent. The cells don't go up into the lungs to get the air to remain round. So he squats and squats for 20 minutes. When he gets up, half of the cells in the legs have turned to sickle shape because there was no oxygen. And the way he described it is fantastic. As soon as I get up, I feel the pain going up my spine and going into the chest. So I said, look, the answer is there. This is called the tourniquet, Tourniquet, the tourniquet effect. You put a tourniquet on your legs, the blood is not flowing up into the lungs, and you get a sickle cell crisis. Oh, thank you, doctor. He's not had a crisis like that since. So, question number 1, you do not get sickle cell anemia from a blood group O. Question number 2, achievers are less interested in how to remove slow cells, vaso-occlusive veins, than they are in management. But what I do is that when they come in, the first thing I do is not to give them a painkiller, but to give them a drip, normal saline, however low the hemoglobin is, because blood itself can cause a sickle cell crisis. And if I have to transfuse them to save life, then I do what is called a partial exchange blood transfusion. You take some of the sickle cell blood from the left arm and you put some of the norm blood in the right arm, and they would get up and walk the next day. Please put the patient first before the disease. And finally, on Facebook, recently, there is a Yoruba woman who is described as the oldest person with sickle cell disease, celebrates her 90th birthday. Right, now, we've got to find out what this sickle cell disease is. It's obviously, is it ache or is it norm ache, which somebody is calling ache. And if it's ache, what are the aches? Is it a sickle ache plus another ache like Korl? Because there is an ache hemoglobin which we discovered when I was there called hemoglobin Korl. You can Google that. Where sickle cell hemoglobin Korl ache is not a bad one at all. It's not as bad as the sickle cell hemoglobin C disease. I hope what I have said has been helpful a bit. There are other things I could have said, but please remember that when a person is sickle cell disease, he or she should not be characterized by the disease, but should be characterized by her genius, her brain. I've had patients who have been professors in the university, and the lawyer that I mentioned, who went into crisis with a teaspoon of gin, became a professor of law in the university. Brilliant. And went to Oxford University as well. So sickle cell disease patients are not just disease phenotypes on legs. They are also brilliant, beautiful, and marvelous. Thank you very much.